G'day, Justin Holcomb, RightSource, talking all things governance for your not-for-profit at the moment. So we've had a couple of conversations recently in terms of, especially with clients, in terms of why they do things in their not-for-profit. And I suppose at some point, you develop a lot of rituals in terms of how you run your organization. And sometimes because of those rituals, you forget the why. Like, why are we doing this in the first place? Well, because we've always done it. Yeah, but that doesn't actually tell us the why. And when I'm working with organizations in terms of their governance and helping them really get value out of their governance, one of the things that I always want to do is make that governance lived. And to make governance lived, you need to give it the same thing that everything else that's living has, and that's a purpose. So that's really about drilling in and understanding the why of things. And we do this governance piece because of this, and that is why, and that's its purpose. So that's what I'm trying to make sure that we all understand when I'm working with an organization, is what's the purpose of the governance. And today, I wanted to talk about minutes, and minutes of board meetings specifically. And I mean, are you wasting your time doing minutes? So what's the point? Let's start with the why. Why do you do minutes? Well, in forming an organization, quite often the law, so whether you do it as a company limited by guarantee under the Corporations Act, or you do it through other mechanisms, generally speaking, that will require you to do minutes. It will also quite probably be stated in your constitution that you need to do minutes of meetings. So that's the why. That's the legal reason why, because the law says so. Now, what's the purpose of the minutes though? The purpose of the minutes is to provide an evidence that there was a meeting held and who was at that meeting, and of what resolutions or decisions were made. That's what they're for. To expand on that a little more, and the other purpose that runs alongside that is in making those decisions at the meeting, so the board, so the directors specifically making those decisions, part of their obligations under the Corporations Act, under the ACNC, is to act in good faith and to do what's best for the company. So part of the minutes is also to ensure that there is evidence that the directors have done their due diligence when making a decision. When they've made a decision, they've made it on information that's been provided, and they've made that decision with reasonable care. That's sort of it for minutes. The evidence of a meeting, the resolutions that were made, and a bit about why those resolutions were made to show that the directors did it with reasonable care and carried out their duties effectively. One of the issues that comes up with minutes a lot when we talked about the purpose of, it's to show that decisions were made and why those decisions were made. Minutes can often be done as a transcript, effectively recording all the conversations that happened at the meeting, who said what, potentially who disagreed, things that happened. A lot of this is superfluous to the decision that was made, or there was no decision made, or there was not even a request for a decision to be made, more importantly. These were just general discussions. Now, they don't need to be recorded, and this is where you end up with minutes that are pages and pages long with detail in them that doesn't talk to the purpose, which is why were decisions made or not made. It just talks about, well, so-and-so said this was raised, but why? What? It doesn't, it gives a lot of information, and though that information can help you feel safe that you haven't missed recording anything, one of the things it does do is it makes the minutes very hard to read down the track. Like when you're trying to read the minutes to understand, well, what resolutions were made and what decisions or what information was used to make those decisions, having a lot of sort of supporting, or not even supporting, but superfluous information in there can actually make it very hard to understand how the directors came to that decision, because it reads like it's all over the place. So one of the really important things in minutes is to try and keep them succinct. And there's a balance. So minutes, there isn't a general rule. It's a balance between keeping that succinctness so that you're not having a transcript or basically a recording of the meeting, but also having enough detail in there to, if you do refer to it in a year or 2 years or 3 years, that someone looking at the minutes can understand, okay, well, this is the decision that was made, and this is the information that the board considered in making that decision. There's an important point to be made here in terms of what you capture in minutes. So when a board is making a decision, good practice is that they will have some information presented to them in board papers prior to the meeting. Now, there's a whole nother video we've done on board papers. Definitely watch that if you want to get some idea on how you make your board papers effective. What those board papers are doing should be doing is giving the directors the information they need that's pertinent to the decision they're going to be asked to make at the board meeting. So what you're trying to do in making the board meeting effective is give them that information early so that they can raise any other questions or ask for any other additional information they might need in making that decision and helping the decision be made at the meeting. Why is that important for minutes? Well, in the minutes, you want to capture the fact that those documents were sent to the directors. So it's noting in the minutes what documents they've received and also noting in the minutes what additional information they might have requested at the board meeting. That way, you don't actually need to rehash or retype all of the information that was sent out in those papers. Effectively, by referring to those papers, they're forming part of the minutes. That is what was considered. You don't need to retype that. And that really does help in terms of keeping your minutes succinct, because if those papers are effective in terms of the information they provide, the directors are assumed to have read and understand those papers. If that then allows the directors to make a decision, it actually allows your minutes to stay quite succinct in that you can refer to the papers, you can ensure that a discussion was had, that people understood, any questions were asked, and that the decision was made. And that's really what you need to capture in the minutes. Now, if there was no decision needed to be made, and if it was just for noting, well then you just say those papers were noted. That's all you need to do. It's really about keeping the pertinent information in the minutes, and that's something that ultimately is learnt over time, and why having an experienced company secretary, someone experienced in taking minutes, can add some value to your organization. A couple other sort of points along with that, with decisions that are made, once a decision's made, it's the board's decision. So even if you end up putting something to a vote and it's not unanimous, which can happen depending on how the procedures of the meeting are going to run, you don't need to capture that in the minutes, because once a decision is made by the board, it's the board's decision. And outside of that boardroom, the board should be cohesive in applying that decision, because it's the decision the board has made. Sometimes, if something's very controversial or topical, some directors may want to have the fact that they disagreed or they had a differing view noted in the minutes. That's fine. But generally speaking, when a decision is made, that is the mind of the board, and that is the decision the board has come to, and the supporting information that was provided should show that that decisions aren't necessarily black and white, that there were pros and cons that were weighed up and then a decision was made. The other thing I touched on just very quickly was recording meetings. Now, you can record meetings. There's no reason why legally you can't record a meeting and say, well, that's what happened. I don't recommend recording meetings. I think it can stifle the conversation, because sometimes if people know that everything's being recorded, and the same thing in minutes, if your minutes are a transcript and the directors know everything's being recorded, they might be reluctant to raise a controversial or even something that they think that the rest of the board might think is a stupid question. So it prevents that free flow of conversation. So that's where you want the minutes to be crafted and put together to capture the pertinent information, so that directors don't feel like it's bad asking a stupid question. And quite often those stupid questions actually turn out to be very, very valuable. So I would definitely not recommend recording meetings, to do minutes. I suppose that's in summary how minutes should be taken and where you get to. Committees, similar to boards, you should follow the same process. There's still definitely, you want to show the decisions, the resolutions that were made and the decisions that came to. So you want to keep a similar process through all the minutes of the organization, so that way you get in the flow and it becomes a new ritual that your organization follows. And lastly, with minutes, because it is meant to represent and be evidence of the meeting and what happened, you want to compile those minutes as soon as possible after the meeting's happened, so that it's fresh and it is an accurate account of what happened, and also circulate that to the chair, the CEO, and the rest of the directors as soon as possible also, so that they can ensure that nothing was missed and that their recollection of the meeting matches what has been captured in the minutes. And also it prevents where if you do it, look at them a month after, sometimes things have progressed since that meeting and it can get hard to remember what happened at the meeting and what happened directly after. So that's also why doing minutes there is important. And last point with all this, all that discussion, really there wasn't anything there about the CEO, and quite often it's funnily enough, it's the CEO that's driving for minutes to be done because they want to understand what the board has asked of them. To, I suppose, assist with that and not then go to putting more detail in minutes, other things that you can do or that you should do is, one, you should have an actions register. It's very useful to have an actions register that sits alongside the minutes. So the minutes captures the meeting and the evidence of what's happened. The actions are then, well, this is what we need to do in preparation for the next meeting, and it has what, who, and by when. And that can be quite useful for a CEO to get straight after the meeting to go, okay, well, these are the actions that need to happen, and start getting them done without waiting for the minutes to be finished. Further to the actions register, sometimes some people like to have a decisions register as well, so that the directors or the CEO can go to one spot and say, well, this is all the decisions that have been made this year, rather than having to go back to individual minutes and find where they are. That decisions register can quite often be a nice reference point and can help speed things up when people go, well, what did we decide 3 months ago? It can be then readily accessed. And that's it for minutes. So it's an area that definitely can waste a lot of time for organizations in terms of doing too much or just trying to capture too much. And sometimes knowing the why something is done can help you be more efficient in that process and make those documents more alive for the organization and useful. So I hope that was helpful for you guys today. We really wanted to, minutes is a really topical point at the moment for a lot of my clients. So I hope that was useful. It sort of reflects a lot of conversations I've been having over the last month. So if you like that video, definitely check out our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of videos on governance and not-for-profit. Feel free to subscribe. Any questions, chuck a comment down below. I'll definitely try and get back to you. Or check me out on LinkedIn, connect there. Happy to have a conversation and help the governance of your not-for-profit be more lived. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you taking the time. It's Justin Hogg from RightSource.